Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager and an emerging people leader, thus a leadership enthusiast.
We are doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, leadership decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show, to look at how leadership is all around us, and even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and in the opportunities around us.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers in these episodes. In this episode, we're talking about Season 2, Episode 14, Day 1, and Episode 15, All Good Things Must Come to an End. Let's jump in.
Okay, we are coming to the end of Season 2. And in this episode, Season 2, Episode 14, called Day 1, basically it's just a series of flashbacks to what everyone who's part of the team was doing on that Day 1. And I know for me, the biggest leadership thing I saw there was Lieutenant Warren, who was, in fact, a lieutenant, when she was getting a bunch of calls and then they got redeployed and they were asking her to do all this different stuff. And the way that she was able to stay organized and communicate to the people around her that things had changed. And I think her exact words were, they tell me to move vehicles. That's what I do. I move vehicles. So it was what I appreciated about what she said there too, was like, in the face of ambiguity, she was like, what is my role? What is my job? Let me do that.
Yeah, like you said, I thought this leadership or this episode didn't have a lot of, because it was all flashbacks of kind of like that leadership thing. I think that part stuck out for with Roberta for sure. I also thought that it in a way highlighted like sometimes you need to take that pause for reflection as well, right? They've progressed as a team, they've normalized. Roberta as a leader, I think that as an outsider watching that and now understanding the backstory for a lot of those people, it also provides context for some of what they want to do. So I think even though Roberta wasn't like, what did you do on day one? We get to see that. And I think that as a leader, sometimes it's important to make sure that you understand where people are coming from because, they have a lot of different experiences with things. So, I thought that was one of the more interesting pieces of the episode as well.
That's a really great point. I love because reflection is one of the best ways, the most expansive ways, I would say, that leaders develop. So taking that time to reflect, not only on what you know and what you've learned, but like how far you've come, how that's, the things the challenges you've faced and how you've faced them. So that's a really great point.
Yeah, like even when you look at like Mac and Addie, right? So Mac is gone now, but in that flashback, you learn they met up on day one, like at that hockey event, fighting the zombies. So it's like that loss of Mac from that start of that career piece and always having that anchor, that constant, somebody that you have so many shared experiences with, how that can be like really difficult. So I think from like change management or just like as teams get restructured or as you're doing those things, like I think those are things that oftentimes in the stress of the situations, especially going through some like restructuring, downsizing, upscaling in other places within my own organization, you can very quickly it's a daunting task. It gets a little overloading. And I think you can really start to just put people down as numbers and skills, right? So it's like this, this type of skill, we need those over here. And you're not really looking at that whole dynamic piece, which is going to make your job, I think, as being an effective leader and getting things accomplished a lot more difficult. So I thought that was sort of an interesting piece too.
Absolutely. That's a great point. There's something else Roberta did, because of course she's Roberta, and something else that she did that was really good, where when she hears the chaos outside, she doesn't send someone else to go look. She goes and looks, right? She goes to figure it out. Like, what is that sound? What is causing this chaos? And what I appreciated about that is that's one of those like core things in leadership where it's like you go first and you figure out what the situation is. You can have people definitely who can go first and they find out something, they bring it back, for the betterment of the group. But there are many times when the people that you lead, especially as they're new leaders or as you're guiding them towards things, or people who are just followers, which is also fine. You need to know what the situation is. And sometimes as a leader, you need to see it with your own eyes. And it's not about micromanagement. It's just about like, I need that perspective. I need that proximity to what it is so that I can actually guide people and move everything forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I think the proximity piece as well often gets lost. I wonder, I don't experience it as much, but I wonder if that is maybe in your experience from a remote perspective with a remote workforce. Like, is that a harder thing to do, or do you have to put more effort into it, or is it just doesn't happen as naturally?
That's a great question. I would say it's just different, which it feels like a cop-out answer, but I promise it's not. And that's that there are other ways to connect and to kind of stay proximal to something in that way where it doesn't need to be necessarily, some things need physical proximity, absolutely. But I think the other thing is just staying close to the people that you lead, the people on your team. There is effort that is required with that, but I think there's also effort whether you're hybrid or not. So if you're in person, sometimes it's like, I have to sit next to these people 5 days a week and I don't like them, right? Or by Thursday, I don't like them. So then you'll start to have that disconnect. So similar, but of course different in that, yeah, the proximity piece in a remote environment, it just requires a different type of, the same amount, but like just a different type of care and consideration.
That's interesting. Yeah. Like I said too, I think in my own experiences, a lot of leaders, you just like people sort of get into that grind, and you're not, that's not it becomes very robotic and like and then I think the issue or the problem with that a lot of times too is then there's like this knee jerk or overreaction to certain changes in the environment that don't necessarily need to be that way. It's just because, again, like you had talked about, people not really being close enough to understand what's going on, whether it's, I don't want to say personal, but we'll say like personnel driven, or if it's like job goal specific driven, changing goal, or hiccup or something like that, it becomes this way blown out thing, which if people are just aware, keeping up with it wouldn't be a big deal. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Well, and like that piece that you just said too, that like keeping up and being aware. Sometimes when I talk to leaders, they say that they only meet with the people that they lead as needed, maybe quarterly, maybe even sometimes just during their annual evaluation or, however companies work that. And I think that's really interesting because like weekly or bi-weekly at the most, like that should be the most spread apart it should be. Those weekly check-ins not only allow you to stay proximal to that person, but all those things that come up, now you have a better understanding of this is why it's important to that person. This is what support looks like. This is what success or failure looks like. And it's not like you then needing to take all this time to reflect and draw out a plan and do all this stuff to figure those things out. It comes much more simply to you because you've already been proximal in these other ways. But those like people, like leaders need to be checking in, even if it's just for 30 minutes, at least once a week with their direct reports.
Yeah, that's good points. I'll take the note. God, okay, I'll check in more. But
are you writing it down? Write it down.
Yeah, it's kind of. I know we said we weren't going to talk too terribly much about stuff, so now that we're talking about that, those weird little leadership, or not weird little leadership skills, right? Core components of kind of a good leader. But when Doc, when you're doing his flashback, and there's like, it's kind of this tease almost of, you think somebody's turned to a zombie in the office because there's a guy, he's in his counseling facility thing, guy that's losing his temper over like divorce stuff. Doc comes in. I realize this is a television show and you probably would never put hands on an employee, but I also think it was really interesting, like that, right? That conflict resolution, right? Somebody was getting way out of hand. And so like, I don't deal, I always think it's interesting. I don't work in a like customer like service, I guess you could call it. I like to think of most of IT and software development and all that kind of stuff as being customer service. You're developing for a user group. They're always right, type thing. But I just thought that was like really interesting. I was like, man, imagine if you're a manager in retail or something and you're dealing with a customer that's getting like out of hand with one of your teammates. And I thought that was really cool. He came in, he didn't say anybody was right or wrong. He's like, you chill now, we good. And I thought that was like a really, that kind of, resolving that conflict pretty easily. And then he was able to walk away, double checked with his teammate, right? Made sure she was good, had it, made sure that guy was good, and left it be as, just no big deal. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yes, I think that definitely showed one of the core reasons why Doc is so effective and why people do listen to him. Because you're right, in that moment, he de-escalated the situation. He didn't meet the moment with the same amount of aggression or energy. He met the moment with what was needed. And when he was talking to that person, he pointed back to why the other doctor in the room was so valuable to him and why she was such a great resource. So I agree. Yeah, that was another really good part. That just shows like the type of leader that Doc is. And that's the other thing that I love about leadership and that I appreciate about this show, which is that like leadership is all around us. Like you don't have to have a title or any type of authority to demonstrate these really great qualities of leadership and to be a really great team member.
Yeah. I think it was obviously then everybody turns into a zombie. Spoiler, right? Everybody turns into a zombie afterwards, essentially the moment he turns his back. But I really liked he just let it go, right? There was this issue, he resolved it, moving on, right? And I am inferring, but I truly believe that issue would not be brought up again, right? Like that was a small glitch in time, and we're moving on. And I think that ability is something that I see consistently lacking with leaders within my industry. Is obviously if you punch somebody, okay, all bets are off.
Fired.
Yes, yeah. But I just mean you'll see times when people maybe make the wrong call, right? With like made the best call they could with the information they had, but it was the wrong call, or maybe it was just a bad call all the way around. Maybe there was a disagreement about a way to move forward that got like slightly more heated. Again, not throwing fists or anything, but the inability for people to let that go or let the person at that either made the bad call or got the most sort of passionate, we'll call it, about this, they never let that go, right? And that comes up on their evaluations. That's taken into consideration when it comes to promotions, when it comes to pay, when it comes to opportunities. It's like, oh, loose cannon over there. Nope, just human, right? Just a human. So that's like, I don't know. That's a big trigger for me. It's like, just let people start with a fresh day every day, if it's a constant thing, right? That's a different story, but it's amazing how people can just not ruin their career, but one bad day can cause a bad 5 years after that.
That's a really great point, because I think that there are times when there's a big difference between a pattern and just an incident.
Yeah.
And so as long as the person who had the incident, like you can never abuse other people at work, verbally or otherwise, I think that's always inappropriate. Your bad day does not mean that I have to be uncomfortable in my workspace.
Yeah.
But also I have seen people who like, they say something stupid or they make a big mistake or whatever. And you're right, people don't let it go. And so they're not actually letting that person grow from it. And what they're doing too, and this is something that I see a lot, where then it's almost like they pick this place in time where this person was professionally the weakest. And when someone's weak, it means you have control over them. And so they then try to exercise that control by just always picturing that person in that place. And so it just gives them this other type of like this ongoing like mental control. So people are like, they're talking about this thing, it happened 3 years ago. And it's like, yeah, in that, like, that's when they had the most control over you. So that's who they need you to be. And so those people, those leaders, super air quotes there, should not be leaders, because a leader can let things go. You have to, like, did they learn from it? Did they grow from it? Are they learning and growing from it? Yes. But that's why we guide and we mentor people. And we also say, you know, yeah, we're going to move forward from this moment. Because I know there was an incident at work where, not in my current job, but in a previous job, where somebody had said something and it was wildly inappropriate for the workplace. And I was like, come talk to me. And I said, you know, what you said was wildly inappropriate. This relationship is a professional relationship, and that will not happen again. And he was like, yeah, got it. And then we moved on. And that's what I said. I said, we're moving forward from this moment. And we did. So that behavior was not repeated in, you know, in our group settings or anywhere. And it was like, yeah, they were told. Sometimes also, I feel like I'm getting on a soapbox. Sometimes also, though, it's never, like I said, never okay to be abusive. At the same time, though, sometimes people don't know that their behavior is like off. So you got to say it, and you've got to be firm. This whole compliment sandwich thing that people use, it's confusing. So like, what is the problem? Just tell them what that is and let them fix it. Like, they're an adult. They can totally handle that. I'm going to stop. I'll go on for an hour.
No, I think it's a good point. I think it's a really valid point, because but I like I said, I don't know. I think it becomes a slippery slope, right? Because you let that slide, and then it's amazing to me, especially within my industry in particular, where to let something go, like, it's a dangerous thing, right? It's a very fine line to not make that like spot correction. If somebody that can see that spot correction wasn't made, and they're just not having that best day, right? They're not their 100%. That you could just, it's this domino effect where all of a sudden you can lose a lot in the course of an 8-hour workday of, you know, and then that not gossip, but venting to another coworker about, you saw this, and you know, yeah, that was I didn't want to say the word, right? It's a bad word, but you know, it's just, yeah, it's a fascinating thing. So it's a really good point. On a slight change of topic,
real quick, before you change, I do want to say this. When you said, you know, letting that slide, I don't even think it's about letting it slide. It is about addressing it, and now we're moving forward, right? Yeah. So we don't let things slide, because as leaders, it is our job to guide people, and we can accept that someone's having a bad day. So we're not picking on someone, but at the same time, be like, oh yeah, being late is not okay. Oh, like doing that is not okay. And we don't have to announce it to the group, but it just is one of those things. So I just wanted to address that.
Yeah, I didn't say let it slide. I said not addressing it. You misheard me. Don't listen back, but that's what happened.
Don't replay the tapes. Don't even worry about it.
Not even worry about it. Just take me at my word on that one. But yeah, like I said, it was an interesting episode. I just wanted I wanted to get your thoughts, I guess, on Murphy's flashback, orange jumpsuit, federal prison, mail fraud. I know that you kind of put him on a pedestal sometimes, and I just wanted to notice if I don't know, I saw some clay feet there, so on that pedestal, but no, that was the only thing there. Was I also think it was interesting too, though, from Murphy as a character, all the things that we've seen him go through so far, I thought he had this arrogance in prison too, right? That's kind of like core to him as a person. But there's also this immediate fear, right? When things started going a little sideways, because he had this pseudo control in this tiny little world, right? He was they're playing cards or something. There was a certain level of respect. He had a grasp on that microcosm environment that he was in for prison. And I think it's really interesting because that went away. And it seems like now when we look at some of the decisions he's making, some of the things that have been said to him about, you know, you're the future, everything like that, it's like he just wants stability. You know what I mean? And I think that's really interesting. It's like, because like a lot of team members maybe want just stability, especially if you're in an industry that has a lot of like changes, right? Technology is always changing. So like you got to find consistency somewhere. And I thought that was really, I might be reading into it a little bit much, but I thought that was really interesting.
No, I really like that. It's well, first off, he did what he needed to survive. I'm just kidding. No, that's a really great point, that it's like there's this arrogance that he had, and it was because of the measure of control that he perceived himself as having. And so, yeah, so in all these other situations, he gets real pouty about things, and it's because he doesn't have any control. Is he treated poorly? Yes, I've already addressed it. We'll move on. But yeah, but then as we like see him in other episodes around this, where he's starting to figure out the control that he does have, but he hasn't been mentored and guided enough as a leader to know then what to do with it. So he's going to default back to that arrogance, and that type of like arrogance that comes through control, that is also, not to get all like high school psychology on you, but that whole like it's masking this like deep fear of being in the world and interacting with other people, right? That's really what that arrogance is. But
I am feeling personally attacked right now. No, that's a good point. But again, I think it just, and I think having obviously watched the show a number of times too, moving forward, it's kind of like he's like that becomes his thing, right? He's just trying to create a set box that he has control in, right? And I don't even know if he cares about the control. He just cares about understanding the system, right? That's all he wants, is to understand the structure of the system and how to work in it. And I think just his natural attitude is to sort of take advantage of that system. But either way, it's where he's most comfortable.
I like that. I mean, I don't like that. That's a terrible way to be, but you're right. There's that stability that some people need. And that's why like change initiatives and that kind of stuff is such a challenge, because people would rather have the terrible known than the potentially better unknown. It's because they understand the system. They understand that structure. And so to stay in that does give them a different measure of, I don't know if confidence is the right word, definitely comfort, to be like, this I understand. I know what my next step needs to be. I don't know what that is, so I'm not interested in it.
Yeah.
So then we move into the last episode of this season, called All Good Things Must Come to an End. And kind of at the end of episode 14, the day one, we see that the group has finally gotten to California, and they see this little diner, hole in the wall essentially thing. And we meet Auntie, who is the person who runs that place. So I'll stop there. Tell me, what were your thoughts initially about episode 15?
First of all, I just wanted to say that Auntie is a small business owner, and I don't appreciate large industries coming in and describing that hard work as a hole in the wall. I prefer the term bespoke. But we will move on from that.
I appreciate that call out, and I stand corrected. I will change my vocabulary in the future.
Gosh. No. Yeah. So this episode, I don't know. As we were sort of just talking about what we're going to get into today, I didn't see as much in it, I think, as you had initially. But one of the things that I think is interesting is it's a transition point, because for Warren too now, this was the whole mission. They literally walked, for the most part, across the entire country to get Murphy here. She made the promises to Sergeant Hammond. She made the promises to, why did his name go right out of my head?
Burnett.
Burnett. Yep. Burnett. The little girl that she met. A lot of other people just in passing, right? Because that was, and it was also, when you talk about her elevator pitch for buy into this mission for support, that it was the mission was how you got the buy-in, right? We're going to take Murphy to California. They're going to make a vaccine to cure the zombies. So a lot of her successes, a lot of what she's based her decisions off of, everything is about to be resolved. So it's like, and they have nothing really lined up on the back end of this. There's no next step. So I think one for Warren, that's going to be difficult. But then two, I think if you look at it from like any organization, you kind of always have to have that next step lined up, right? Because otherwise you're going to leave people in this, well, is my job going away? We finished it. What do we do next? What do we do now? So that part I think is really interesting.
I agree. That was it was great. It was a big macro view.
Sorry.
No, you're good. No, you're good. I'm just going to go into the micro a little bit. So, Warren and Vasquez go in first and they meet Auntie, the small business owner.
Thank you.
The bespoke establishment. And what I like about that too is they're seeing it, but Addie, Doc, Murphy, like they are staying back. They don't go in yet. So Warren and Vasquez, again, that like the leaders go first, right? Is this dangerous? So they went in together to check out the situations. And then finally, when they realized it was safe, Warren talking to Auntie and Vasquez going around and making sure that like nothing was hiding from them or no one was hiding from them. And then Warren signaled for the others to come in. So I thought that was really great too, because it's letting people know what you need to do. Maybe you're in a holding pattern, so stay there. But then also, how do you signal people that it's okay to move forward, that it's okay to continue?
Yeah. Well, sorry, I wrote it down because I wasn't sure if you're going to keep going. But the other thing, now that you said that, was that came out wrong. I didn't want to forget.
Is this another soapbox?
No. I was ready. It's a comfortable chair. We're not sponsored yet, so I won't bring up the name. But the thing with Vasquez also that I think was really interesting is that like that's a lot of unspoken, agreed upon trust by everyone. Because when we first met Vasquez, he was going to kill the team, take Murphy, get the reward, right? Which we know is made up. I don't really know if he's been told or if he's fully aware that that was made up by Citizen Z yet. So loose cannon, right? Murphy's valuable. The fact that he and Ward are going in there together alone at this, what is the conclusion where they need to be, I think that's a lot of trust. I think that's really cool that he's gained that the group has established that. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't mean to take you off course there, but
that was perfect, because you're absolutely right. He has been consistent with the group by being completely uninvolved with the group, with the care of the group.
Yep.
So he does different things where he is obviously a decision maker. He's obviously supporting, but we haven't actually, I think maybe the most we've seen him really care about someone was several episodes ago in We Were Nowhere Near the Grand Canyon, when afterwards Murphy is upset and he's in the van and Vasquez says to Warren, he's really torn up, right? I think that was one of the few moments, it's the only one that comes to mind right now, where he was really like, this team member needs more help and like, we should help them. So yeah, I would agree with that. And then we have, so now they're all in this bespoke establishment and another group comes in with who they claim is the Murphy. And when they're all kind of talking and they figure out that maybe they don't have the real Murphy, they're probably lying, and they figure out that who Murphy might be. When Murphy was threatened by the group, when like all of a sudden all the weapons came out, everybody was ready to fight whoever was next to them. And I think that that's another thing that's just like really good, like team dynamics. Like we are definitely in the heavy performing stage now where Warren didn't have to say, nobody needed to say anything for them to all know that like, oh, this is a threat. Boom, eliminate the threat, even though, and so it was whoever was closest to them. So I thought it was a cool moment in just like the unison in which it happened. I know it's a TV show, but just that whole like being so like, you've been on teams like that where you're like so connected that you have these moments where you're like, are we the greatest team who ever lived? Probably.
I consistently make sure whenever I'm having a meeting with my team that if the cubicle row next to us gets too rowdy, we all know who we are supposed to knock out. Like that's a key thing, right? Like Smith, you're taking out Steve. You know what I mean? Like we make sure that everyone knows. So yeah, I think that, and I do like to look at us as pretty high performing. So yeah, no, I appreciate that call out.
Yeah, to you and to your team. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we find out that Auntie's a small business is a front, essentially. Well, it's not really a front. It is, in fact, a business, but it's also a place where she can signal to the quote unquote CDC about the Murphy having arrived. And so what I like to see about Auntie here is she's doing a lot of things that are a remote team member job, right? Like she is in this different location from the CDC folks. She's doing her own thing. She is doing her own defenses. She's, assessing different people as they come in, what's real and what's not. And then when she has the real thing, she sets off that flare to signal to the CDC submarine that she's got something. So I really liked to see her role of, just that, again, a version of a remote team member, but also like super functional, still really making sure things got done, and how she stayed in touch.
Yeah, I think that's also, again, if we're talking about different industries, I often pigeonhole myself into like more tech focused corporate office. But I also think it's interesting if you're, again, like sales, if you work at, Widgets Incorporated, and you have folks that are out at these storefronts that are selling the widgets, interacting with these people, right? That takes another level of like leadership check-in, trust, that whole thing too. So I think that's pretty interesting. But yeah, I guess remote worker as well.
And then
also just nice lady, nice lady. But
yeah, nice people are always great. Super great. So then that submarine comes over, and there's that admiral or that captain. And what's interesting too is that him and Warren, they both start asking each other a lot of questions to make sure they are who they say they are. And it was very obvious who the leaders were, because it was nobody else tried to jump in there. These two were figuring out what this was. And so I thought that was just a really interesting exchange too. And Murphy did jump in there, but it was really her making sure that, like you said at the beginning of this, where it's like, she's at the end now. She needs to make sure this is the end, because she's been told that it was the end a few times already. And now she just needs to make sure so she can have that closure.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole interaction between them, like validating each other, I thought was really interesting, because you could see that everyone was listening. And that's because, at least on, the like bite mark team side, they knew everything, right? Warren kept everyone really well informed. They were there for a pretty long time. And it was kind of like they were waiting for the slip up from the questions that she was asking to react appropriately, right? Mm-hmm. Like we talked about, the moment that the wrong answer was given, that they were going to get out of that situation. You know what I mean? And I thought that was really interesting too, because Warren was able to do the leadership thing, and the team kept doing what they were supposed to be doing, right? So that was neat.
Yes, agreed. Okay, so Murphy goes off. He's with the CDC, quote unquote CDC now, and the Zeros come back, and there's this big fight, shootout, if you will, between Warren's team. They're like, oh, this is over. They were going to try to help Auntie clean up some of the business because things had gone awry when that other group with the fake Murphy came in there. So they're like, hey, we're going to help clean some of this up. And then there's this attack by the Zetos, and Lorena is back. And so I thought it was interesting. I mean, it was just like an interesting fight scene. But what comes out of that is that we have a Scorpion, who we've met several times, one of the leaders of this cartel. But he has had this moment, this catalyst moment for himself, where he realized that what he was following was no longer the same thing. And so he needed to make a change. And so I have some more thoughts about that, but also I think that I wanted to address first that it's like, we have this like sunk cost fallacy where it's like, I've been at this company so long. I've been doing this type of work for so long. I've been doing this for so long. If I leave, it'll fall apart, or I can't leave now because I've invested too much in it. When I think that there are a lot of times when you can walk away and you can walk into something different. But it does like it, and I'm not saying that's easy. Obviously, it requires a lot of like reflection and a lot of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. But I thought that was so interesting for him there because he makes this shift to, I'm not a Scorpion anymore. I'm Hector, right? That is not like you can be. And he even says to Vasquez, you can take your revenge. Like who I was deserves whatever you have coming to him.
Yeah, that's such a good. I'm gonna stop saying that's such a good point because they're all good points. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. But
I do like the validation of hearing that I'm making good points.
Yeah. So I have a very everything like I just hit me on my core with that because I have somewhat of a pessimistic view, or I have like a hot take on that. I'll work with people or interact with people all the time that will talk to me, will and sort of confide. They'll share like their unhappiness, right? They're unhappy with the work, they're unhappy with the team, they're unhappy with the pay, something like that, right? And so my response to that is always like, change. You know what I mean? But do something different. I do that a lot, right? If I'm unhappy with something, I'll try something different. And the answers, and it bums me out because I almost feel like the company's doing it on purpose, but it's like, oh, I have to stay another year. Otherwise, I'm not fully vested in my 401k. Or it's, oh, I've been here for 16 years. I only 4 more years, and then I can really leave and do something different because I won't give up on whatever that, it's normally retirement or money. And I also get making a sound financial decision, right? Like it's not what I'm challenging here, but it's that sunk, like you said, that sunk cost fallacy, and the way it seems like some organizations will prey on that and really like hit you with fear. Even in my past military experience, that was all. You've already done insert a number of years here. You just have X number of years to go, and then you can retire and you get all these benefits and all this stuff. And in basic math, you're going to get those things anywhere you go, right? I should say everywhere. Most industries offer some semblance of healthcare, right? Or they should, but that's a whole nother podcast. Same thing, 401k and retirement, and you can save in any job you have. Again, theoretically, I really sugarcoating this, but the crux of my issue is to stay and be miserable for 3 more years when you could leave and be happy for 3 more years. Like, what's the more valuable thing to you? It's crazy to me. It's crazy.
I agree. I think that also people do a lot of things out of fear, and they try to disguise it as practicality. They're like, yeah, I gotta stay for a year to, like you said, to get fully invested in this or to do that. I know that when I worked at one company and it was lovely. I worked there for a couple of months, but then a job that I really wanted was available at a different company. And I had that internal thing where I was like, oh, I should probably stay for a year because, that's what looks good on a resume or whatever. And then I just remember talking to a friend, to a coach who said, like, who are you going to get in trouble with if you leave this job or like right now? He's like, And it wasn't that I was unhappy, but this other thing was something I really wanted. And he goes, that's not going to be there in a year, right? Somebody else will fill that position and then it'll be closed. So, and then I just remember being like, yeah, like who told me? And it's both, I don't want to be like, again, painting with a broad brush, but like society, but also people then get into that too, where they're like, they buy into that narrative and then they try to convince you. Because I also had seen some of that in the military where I was like, yeah, I'm getting out. If you just stay this much longer, you could retire and have this. And it's like you said, like those things exist in other places too. So yes, hey, this is one path, but I can choose a different one.
And it's not even that they don't just like, they don't believe it and then try to convince you of it. It's then as they move forward, they use that lens, right? Like then now when they are potentially, right? But like they now become a leader, a project manager, program manager, stuff like that. A resume comes in front of them and they see somebody left a job in 6 months and they're like, oh, that's, you know, pogo stick professional, right? You know, no, that's, you're making, you have something, you can't tell me where it came from, and now you're basing decisions off it. Drives me up a wall. But I'm sorry, that's a whole other point for a whole nother thing.
So when Hector tells Vasquez he can take like whatever revenge he has for him, he's ready to accept it because he accepts the person that he was. But then Warren steps in and she doesn't try to stop it, but she says something that I think is really powerful as a leader. And that's that her exact words were, do what you have to, but who are you going to be when you pull that trigger? And so I think that there are times when as leaders, we have to be like, this is your decision to make. I have an opinion. That's not like, but this situation is not mine. But in how I know you, I do just want to ask you just this quick follow-up question to be like, but is that who you really want to be? Is that really how you want to show up? And like she said, do what you have to. If it is, that's you. Like, this is a you decision for you to make. So she could have been like, no fighting. He's on the team now. He's changed. But she accepted how important this was to Vasquez. She also accepted that she took Hector at his word and, and accepted what he was saying, which I think is also really important for leaders at the moment. When someone tells you and shows you who they are, believe them. I didn't say that. Maya Angelou said that.
Like, that's very deep.
But it's so true because, people can change. They absolutely can. And so even though he had a big change there, I just liked that in that moment, she was really meeting the moment and accepting people for who they were and how far they'd come, but also saying, but this is also not my fight. This is yours. So I thought that was pretty powerful.
Yeah. Sorry, I had a thought.
But then I didn't stop talking.
And then nope, that's not on you, that's on me. Yeah, I think then are you ready to move on towards like the end yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, so there's that exchange, right? El Scorpion walks out, no longer El Scorpion, right? So like when he left that bespoke establishment, he was like a new man, right? And that was that. But the mission was over. Murphy was safe on the submarine. And what are your thoughts on Warren's reaction? Like what she did, right? How do you view that? So when it was all said and done, and she's just like, have a nice life, I'm gone, and just starts walking away. What do you think of that?
I actually made a note about that because Doc said, what do we do now, Chief? So looking at her for leadership, and then she says, I don't know, I'm not in charge anymore. And so, yeah, I think that, and we've kind of talked about this before, where it's like, it's okay to be done with something. It's okay to retire. It's okay to move on. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially when like you've done what was asked of you. You've completed that thing. So yeah, I thought it was just kind of that natural piece of that. Yeah, this is over. I don't know. Well, what do I even have in common with you people? But obviously they have a lot in common, but it's one of those things where I think that sometimes when it's the end, it goes back to that sunk cost fallacy we were talking about. What are you now holding on to so desperately and grasping at that is going to prevent you from being able to do other things? What was interesting about that too, I'm just going to say one more thing and I'll let you talk, was that even though she walked away, Addie, Hector, and Doc still followed her. So I think that was also that piece of like, okay, well, she's not charging more, but like, what do we do? So I think sometimes there's that ambiguity around what is next for this group or for this team. And so people will naturally still follow a good leader, even if they're like, I don't know what's next. So I think that's important to remember as a leader, to just keep that in your mind, that like your influences can be bigger than you think.
Yeah, I felt a couple, like, I agree with everything you said. I felt a couple different ways about it, right? And I think it's all about your attitude. So on one hand, her just walking away from the mission, that's fine, right? Yeah, paycheck's over, right? Mission's done. I'm on to the next thing in my life. Have a nice one, right? Please, still send me a Christmas card. Like that kind of thing. But then, on the other hand too, I thought it was a little I don't know what the right word is. I do, but it's a curse word. But like, I thought it was kind of cranky of her to be like, bye. You know what I mean? These people followed you to California, and you're just gonna, yep, you're done. There's no follow on. There's no transition period, right? It's just like, okay, now we're done. You have a nice life. Now that I've walked you across the country. But again, on the flip side of the coin, they followed willingly, right? They were at gunpoint several times, but not because of her. So, well, because of her, but different. You know what I mean? The analogy still stands. So I don't know. I felt like a lot of different ways about it. I think it also got me in the feels, right? Like I felt for that because I've done work where it's ended very abruptly. I've left positions very abruptly. I've also known leaders to leave positions very abruptly with no transition. And that's like a very jarring experience, especially when you have been really well established. Because as a non-leader, in some cases, it's my own, I guess, laziness or complacency, but I got comfortable in following the decisions that they made. And I had really shifted my focus into other things, right? I had a lot of trust that, I'm thinking about one. There's a leader that I was with. I trusted implicitly that they had my best interest in mind and that they were focused on progressing me in my career and they were going to make good decisions for me. So I focused entirely in on the job and really got kind of in that tunnel vision of I was only concerned about the job. And then when I looked up, when they said, I'm leaving, I didn't understand the environment. I didn't understand the culture because I was sort of sheltered almost from that. So like, that's where it's kind of like these people have followed you all the way out to California. And now what? You know what I mean? They've lost people along the way. It's just that whole thing was like, I thought better of her, at the time before that happened, so to speak.
That's such a great, you made so many great points in there. So the first thing I think is that even though work is a transactional relationship, we build other relationships around that. And so it can be hard when we have emotional relationships, stacked on top of a transactional one. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. Like, I know that like my current supervisor, I am very attached to her. Like, I think she, like, similar to what you were saying, I feel like she does have my best interest in mind. She is a great listener. She shelters appropriately, but also widens our scope. So yeah. So if all of a sudden she were to not be my supervisor anymore, I would feel a lot of ways about it, even though it is a transactional relationship. So I think that there's that piece too, where it's like, we also, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of good leaders there, and there are even fewer great leaders. And so when we have them, there is this piece of us that is inspired externally, motivated externally, we do better at our jobs. We do all these things. We show up in a different way. And it's partly because of their influence. And so when that does get taken away, I think there's also the piece of, we see it so rarely that it's like, when is the next time I'm going to see it again? Is the next boss going to be good or care or any of that? And unfortunately, the statistics are in that unlikely, right? Unlikely that there's going to be that. Hopefully that changes in the future, but I think that there's that piece too, where it's like, when we have great leaders, I know that when I was in the military and one of my last assignments, one of my favorite leaders I ever got to work with, he was a senior sergeant major. And then the person who replaced him, we didn't get along. We very clearly didn't like each other from day one. And so it was just like, when the other person was leaving, it was like, I'm like, is there going to be another good one? And then, yeah, it wasn't. So, and then it even made me even more nostalgic for the last one.
Spoiler.
So, yeah.
Well, all I can say is I didn't want to be there either. So,
okay. But yeah, so now we're in this limbo.
Yeah.
The team is in this limbo. And so.
Well, I also think.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. I guess I know we're getting a little long in the tooth on this episode, but Vasquez is no longer Javier. Thank you. Is no longer. I think burned the roof of my mouth with my coffee, but that's my own business. So he is now. He transitioned, right? So I think what was interesting is he came to a point where I won't say he went the wrong way, but the mission was over and he sort of chose like a new mission and like had that whole kind of thing and decided that he was going to become El Scorpion, right? Because that position was now vacant. So I think that's a really interesting sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like he had sort of a heart-to-heart with himself and made that decision. So I think that was really interesting too, because it's an entirely different type of transition, because I almost view it as, I know you're going to disagree, so I'm ready for it, but like, I feel like he transitioned to the dark side. You know what I mean? Like that's what he did. He transitioned to the dark side. So
at this point in the series, though, we don't know that. All we know is that he left the group.
Oh, really? I thought it was very apparent that he became. Doesn't it say?
Nope, not until like mid-season 3. But that's
really?
Okay.
We can edit this part out. We'll start over.
I'm not editing this out. This is great. Because you make a good point here, though, because it's where he opted to not take the life of Hector, which he could have. And then it was like he accepted, though, that in doing that, he was also not going to work with him. He wasn't going to be on a team with him. So he made a choice to not be a part of that team anymore. Right. So he just separates himself from the group at this point. And so I think that that's also something that people, whether they're leaders or otherwise, sometimes need to accept. And that's that sometimes it just isn't going to work for you. Sometimes there are just things in the group, a dynamic that just doesn't work for you. And you don't have to explain that to anybody. It can just not work. And you can leave and you can go find something else that better serves who and what you think you are at that point. And also people change, right? So we change, and as we adapt and we adjust, different things are important to us at different times. So, being able to leave a group, I think, is also kind of like what we've been talking about already. It's people don't, because of that sunk cost fallacy. But it's like, but if this isn't working, if this is going to hurt for him, he would have to be in the same group as the man who killed his wife and child. And so that's a big deal. And so he accepted that he didn't want to take that person's life, but he was also like, but I can't be around you, so I'm going to leave.
Yeah, I like your view of it better.
Who knows if we get further on? I might have more opinions about it.
good point. But it was, I guess you're right. There was a lot more to this episode than I originally sort of took away from it. So I think that's a really great point. Huh.
Thank you.